There are forgotten disasters in Hollywood, films that went so wrong behind the scenes that their stories became warnings for the entire industry. But few people know that one of the biggest disasters in Disney history came from a movie meant to save the studio. This is the story of the Black Cauldron, the animated epic that nearly killed Disney's entire animation department, pushed the company to the edge of shutting down the division forever, and became one of the most chaotic productions ever attempted in American animation. What happened behind the scenes was so extreme that parts of the movie were locked away for decades, and Disney tried to erase its existence from the public eye. But to understand why this film became such a catastrophe, you have to look at the state of Disney in the years that led up to it. After Walt Disney died in 1966, the heart of the company went silent. Walt had been the studio's creative engine, leader, and final decision maker. Without him, Disney entered a long period of confusion. During the 1970s, the animation department slowly declined. The once brilliant nine old men were aging out of the studio. Younger animators wanted to experiment and modernize Disney's style, but there was no unified leadership to guide them. The studio clung to older methods and safer ideas, producing films that rarely captured the excitement audiences wanted. Movies like Robin Hood and The Rescuers performed fine, but they didn't bring Disney back to its former glory. Meanwhile, other forms of media surged ahead. Star Wars changed entertainment forever. Steven Spielberg delivered hit after hit. Japanese animation was gaining interest, and a former Disney animator named Don Bluth broke away from the company, taking many talented artists with him to form his own studio that immediately began competing with Disney on quality. Inside Disney, there was a growing fear that animation might not survive much longer. Executives believed the studio needed something bold, something darker and more mature, something that could compete with the fantasy boom of the late 1970s and early 1980s. That search led them to a popular young adult book series called The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. The studio saw enormous potential. These books combined Welsh mythology, dark magic, and epic adventure. For many inside Disney, this was their chance to create something that felt like an animated Lord of the Rings. If it worked, it could redefine the studio's future and prove that Disney animation could evolve. Disney acquired the rights and began adapting the story, but very quickly the project grew in ambition. The Black Cauldron was envisioned as the most advanced animated film Disney had ever attempted. It would have richer backgrounds, more complex camera movements, and a much darker tone than anything Disney had produced. The fantasy world was filled with undead soldiers, monstrous creatures, and disturbing magic, a huge departure from the colorful fairy tales audiences expected. This was also the first Disney film to experiment with computer animation, something almost unheard of in the early 1980s. The young animators were energized by the chance to break new artistic ground, but the older generation saw the project as too risky and too far from the traditional Disney style. Creative disagreements began early and never fully stopped. As development moved forward, new problems piled up. The story constantly changed. Writers rewrote major scenes again and again. Directors disagreed on the tone. Should it be frightening? Should it lean more heroic? Should it follow the books closely or take major creative liberties? There was no single answer, and that lack of clarity slowly turned the production into a chaotic struggle. At the same time, Ron Miller, Walt's son-in-law, became the CEO of Disney and pressed hard for the Black Cauldron to be their breakthrough hit. With pressure mounting from the top, the budget started climbing far beyond normal limits. The animation team was pushed to deliver a film that matched the growing expectations, even though the overall direction remained unstable. The production quietly became the most expensive animated movie ever attempted up to that point, passing the $40 million mark, which was a massive gamble for a studio already struggling financially. Then came the biggest blow. Don Bluth, one of Disney's brightest talents, left the studio and took more than a dozen animators with him. Bluth had been frustrated with the studio's slow decision-making and lack of artistic vision. His departure stunned Disney and struck at the heart of the animation department. Morale collapsed. The studio had lost a huge amount of talent at the worst possible time, right in the middle of its most demanding production. Even worse, Bluth immediately released The Secret of NIMH, which critics praised for its mature themes and quality. Disney animators now watched a competitor, built from their own people, outperform them in the very area they were trying to innovate. The pressure inside Disney climbed higher, with talent leaving, direction shifting, and money pouring into a project that still lacked stability. The Black Cauldron entered full production. The animation was complex and time-consuming, with scenes involving smoke effects, multi-layered shadow work, and early CGI elements that took days to render for even a few seconds of film. The production schedule fell behind again and again. Many scenes had to be reanimated because of changes in tone or story decisions. Rumors spread inside the studio that the film was becoming unmanageable, but at that point, too much money had been invested to stop. Disney needed the movie to work. When the production finally reached the point of internal test screenings in 1984, everyone involved hoped the work would speak for itself. Instead, disaster struck. The test audience was mostly families, the same people Disney movies traditionally attracted. But as the film played, reactions turned to horror. Children cried during the darker scenes, especially moments involving the Horned King's undead warrior army. Parents were upset by the violent imagery and the intense moments of characters being transformed, threatened, or mutilated. Some people walked out. Others complained loudly. The atmosphere inside the screening room made it immediately clear that something was very wrong. The film was frightening in ways Disney had never shown before, and not in a way that felt artistic or meaningful. It simply felt disturbing and confusing. Disney executives stared at the results in disbelief. The film was over budget, behind schedule, and now clearly unusable in its current form. It was too dark for children, too chaotic for adults, and too messy for release. The Black Cauldron had become a crisis. And that crisis was about to collide with a major shift in Disney leadership that would push the entire production into one of the most dramatic editing battles in animation history. The timing of the disaster could not have been worse for Disney. As the animation department tried to figure out how to salvage the movie, a major change in leadership shook the company. In 1984, after financial struggles and a hostile takeover attempt, Disney brought in a new leadership team. Michael Eisner as CEO and Jeffrey Katzenberg as head of the film division. Katzenberg was known for being aggressive, direct, and brutally honest when something was failing. When he reviewed The Black Cauldron for the first time, he immediately understood why the test screening had gone so badly. The film was too dark, too violent, and too confusing for the audience Disney relied on. He demanded changes and ordered heavy cuts before release, believing it was the only way to prevent a public relations disaster. When Katzenberg entered the editing room to make these changes, the production team pushed back. Directors and animators argued that entire sequences could not be removed without damaging the story and the visual flow. But Katzenberg didn't hesitate. He personally began cutting footage, scene after scene, without waiting for permission. The tension escalated into a confrontation so intense that Ron Clements, one of the directors, called CEO Michael Eisner to stop Katzenberg from tearing the film apart himself. Eisner agreed that Katzenberg needed to step back, but the mandate remained the same. The film needed cuts, and it needed them fast. The result was one of the most notorious editing jobs in animation history. About 12 minutes of completed animation were removed, including some of the most ambitious sequences ever created for the film. One of the most infamous deleted scenes involved the Cauldron-born, the undead soldiers raised by the Horned King. In the original version, their resurrection featured graphic melting and disintegration of living characters, imagery so intense that even adults found it disturbing. Katzenberg insisted that scenes like this had no place in a Disney film. Those moments, along with several sequences showing violent transformations and prolonged torture, were completely removed. Due to the method of editing and the handling of the film negatives, much of this footage was believed lost for decades. Some pieces surfaced years later in rare work prints, but the majority has vanished forever. Removing these scenes created continuity problems. Animators had spent years timing actions to specific animation beats, and now entire chunks were missing. Characters appeared in new shots without explanation, transitions felt abrupt, and pacing became uneven. But there was no time to fix the underlying problems. The film had to be finished. Disney could not afford further delays or additional animation. So the studio pushed forward with the patched-together version, hoping that the average moviegoer would not notice the rough edges. While the editing chaos unfolded, another problem grew. Disney had no idea how to market the movie. The Black Cauldron was too dark for small children, but not compelling enough for adults. It didn't fit the traditional Disney style, and the company feared backlash from parents who felt misled. Merchandise partners, already skeptical, backed away. No major toy lines, no fast food deals, and no special promotions supported the release, something unheard of for a Disney animated film. The company planned a quieter rollout, avoiding the flashy marketing campaigns that usually accompanied their movies. Then came a decision that made the situation even worse. The Black Cauldron ended up being released in the summer of 1985 directly against the Care Bears movie. It was supposed to be an easy win for Disney to dominate children's entertainment. Instead, the opposite happened. The Care Bears movie was cheaper, gentler, and perfectly targeted to young families. The Black Cauldron, with its grim atmosphere and unsettling visuals, could not compete. Parents chose the friendlier option, and box office numbers collapsed almost immediately. When the final financial results came in, the disaster was undeniable. The film had cost over $40 million to produce, making it the most expensive animated movie ever created up to that point. But it earned only about $21 million worldwide. This made it not just a failure, but a catastrophic one. Inside Disney, executives panicked. Some openly questioned whether the company should shut down the animation department entirely. After all, the studio had invested everything into making this their big comeback. Instead, it had become one of the biggest financial bombs in their history. The consequences were immediate and severe. The film was quietly buried. Disney refused to release it on home video for over a decade, making it the only major Disney film of the modern era to be effectively locked away. Some younger employees found themselves shuffled to different projects or pushed aside as the company tried to stabilize. The reputation of the animation department hit an all-time low, but something unexpected began to happen behind the scenes. Because the department was on the brink of being shut down, Disney allowed younger animators more creative freedom than they ever had before. Those animators included future legends like John Lasseter, Glenn Keane, Andreas Deja, and Ron Clements, and John Musker. With leadership distracted by larger corporate issues, this new generation quietly started developing ideas that would later become part of the Disney Renaissance. The Black Cauldron's failure forced the studio to rethink everything: story structure, artistic style, marketing, and overall vision. The disaster taught them that they needed strong direction, unified tone, and clearer identity. They also realized that audiences wanted heart, humor, and emotional storytelling, not just visual spectacle or dark fantasy. These lessons shaped the next decade of Disney animation. Films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin followed, each one drawing from the painful lessons learned during the making of The Black Cauldron. In the years that followed, the movie slowly gained a cult following. Some fans appreciated its unique atmosphere and bold ambition. Others were fascinated by the lost scenes and the legendary chaos behind its creation. Disney eventually released it on VHS in the late 1990s, allowing a new generation to see the film that the company had once tried so hard to hide. Its legacy is complicated. It was a failure, but an important one. Without the Black Cauldron collapsing the way it did, Disney may never have re-examined its creative direction so deeply. And without that shift, the Disney Renaissance might never have happened. In the end, The Black Cauldron stands as one of the most important failures in animation history. It represents a moment when a studio tried to reinvent itself but lacked the leadership, structure, and clarity needed to succeed. It nearly brought Disney Animation to an early grave, yet its collapse became the turning point that pushed the company into a new era of greatness. The Black Cauldron was meant to save Disney. Instead, it changed Disney forever. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.